everybody's been very patient so far. Any questions or comments?
Sure. So I have a question. So what do you think stops professionals from being able to collaborate on digital literacy effectively? Like, what are the major roadblocks there?
My research into that question suggests that it is professional silos that are the primary barrier. In pre-professional education, those professions don't mix very much. They don't come to understand what others can bring to the conversation, bring to the table. So it's really, I think the future lies in helping people at the pre-professional stage to understand who the players are in any particular context and what they might contribute. And a school setting is a perfect example. Understanding from the teacher's side what the librarian really can bring to the table, librarians understanding the teacher's perspectives and the challenges that they face in their day-to-day professional experience. And I also think that there's a role for the public librarians there too. But there's simply a lack of understanding and a lack of support, I think, also at higher levels to promote that kind of collaboration.
And myself, well, I'd agree with that too. I mean, there are definitely knowledge silos which are shaped by the disciplines that we belong to, the kind of research we do, who funds the research. I mean, we kind of look at different sets of problems. But I think if you're asking for professionals, there's a whole heap of professionals who are actors in looking at digital literacy and its relevance to the contemporary media environment, which is where people seek information. And very much, I think, opportunities such as this is really great to see. For example, for librarians, information seeking is encountering all these problems to do with the media system and the media environment. And some of the actors, for example, in what I'm looking at the moment, which is misinformation, some of the people spreading it are very aware of, asking people to use critical thinking skills in order to assess and evaluate and weigh up different kinds of information. So they're very keen to get in forms of evidence that might be persuasive and all those kind of things. How do you educate people about how to discern the difference between... I mean, I do believe also, despite being a bit provocative there, that there are good sources of information and bad sources of information. But it's much more difficult in the environment where people are searching for information to discern the difference now. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but maybe people working across different industries and disciplines, that might be a good place to start, at least.
Can I sort of say what you both said, but in a slightly different way? So I think the challenge that professionals have is they don't understand the life world of the user. Right? Or actually, the user is a terrible term. They don't understand the life world of human beings, right? In terms of how we build up our pictures of the world, and how we build up our pictures of the world is primarily social. It's through interactions with other people, right? And so hence when the professional goes in with their particular intervention, be it an education intervention, we're going to do some training, we're going to do some learning, be it here's a guide, here's an FAQ, right? Or some kind of information product. And that kind of, it's like almost like dropping a lead weight, right, into a pool. It sinks and disappears, right? Because that's not actually how people learn, how people build up pictures of the world. And for a professional to be successful, they actually have to be embedded in those communities of knowing, right? And if you're not embedded in those communities of knowing, you'll very likely fail. And like going to some of the political stuff, where I think it gets interesting is when you start to link up some of the digital literacy things with things like deliberative democracy and citizens' juries, which are kind of like anti-Twitter, right? So Twitter's 280 characters. I think, like, I've seen beautiful streams on, you know, I've seen, like, when somebody like shares their life with you on Twitter. So say, you know, somebody going through a really tough time, somebody with a life experience very different to you, and you see their thread, that to me is a really good use of the medium because it puts you in their world, it's immersive, there's nothing quite like it, it's fantastic. But most of it, a lot of it is people shouting at each other. By the way, I used to be a troll, but I was a very specific kind of troll. I predated other trolls, right? Until I realised that really wasn't helping.
I've seen your LinkedIn feed, Matt, you're still a troll.
I just want to finish off the thought, and then I will shut up because I realise I've just kind of guessed what I said earlier. So, going back to it, if you are, you know, the idea of citizens' juries and deliberative democracy is we slow things down. It's not 280 characters. It's maybe like a series of get-togethers of 100 people of different backgrounds exploring issues with experts over weeks. So there's one happening in the UK right now, I think it's around climate change, right? And it's David Attenborough's involved, and they've deliberately picked people, some of whom are climate change skeptics, right? You know, because they want a representative sample of the population, and they want to take them through the evidence slowly. So kind of slow thinking, slow reading, rather than fast. Anyway, that's my bit. Okay, Angie, that lady there, that gentleman there.
I guess to pick up on that point of misinformation, one of the issues appears to be around, in terms of misinformation, it seems to be around the trust deficit. Because those of us who were educated pre the internet, we critically evaluate content in a particular way. But at that time, the content sources, we sort of knew, we were taught which ones you could trust and which ones you couldn't trust. The issue we seem to have now is that a lot of the sources that were established, people are being told, well, you can't trust those. The other issue is around transparency. Who is funding those sources? It's not really clear, and perhaps, and I'd like to understand, maybe it's about understanding who is funding all of these websites, you know, being some regulation around what the sources are, because we can barely find out who owns particular companies. We know we have issues in some countries, such as Australia, where certain people own 75% of certain media channels. So it seems to me that trust deficit is the issue in terms of being able to critically evaluate, as well as the social issues as well. So I'd like to see if some transparency might help, which isn't a digital solution, it's a regulatory one.
Thoughts? Responses?
Well, I will say that it might help in some cases, but truly, in you know, Amelia had used the word culture wars, and that's really what's going on. You're actually not going to change anybody's mind on one end of the political spectrum by helping them understand who's funding their information sources. It's not convincing. Okay, minds are made up, views are entrenched. I'm not optimistic about that approach.
I think I'm with Heidi. We know who funds Fox News. We know who funds News Corp. We know who funds The Guardian and the ABC, right? These are not mysteries. I mean, there are some other things if you look at like certain Russian bot things, but the bulk of information sources, we know who funds them, right? I think transparency is often put forward as the thing that will solve our problems, and I think it only gets you so far.
I'd also say, I mean, what I kind of was thinking about, even while I was thinking about and writing this paper, is when I was going through my undergraduate degree, there was a big focus in destabilising, deconstructing big sources of information. The institutions, you know, in some ways that has contributed to where we are now. And I think, you know,
Postmodern neo-Marxist, Amelia.
well, Bruno Latour was involved in the science wars back when, where he was saying that science is socially constructed, and so now he has backpedaled a little on that because he obviously sees what's happening in terms of climate change being seen as socially constructed, and the scientists involved by a number of influencers, they're funded as well, who is funding them, you know, I mean, and so then it becomes this just spiral. And again, Dana Boyd in that TED talk said, well, if that's what we have done, we've just deconstructed knowledge and brought such skepticism around how knowledge is produced, and there are no kind of universal truths, then that's where people can, you know, bad actors can exploit the vacuum left behind. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure that I just reflected on that, which is not to say I do believe in the social construction of knowledge and meaning. So, but I just reflected on, you know, how that happened on the left. Now it's being used on the right and weaponized on the right.
It's kind of interesting how they've switched round, how in the 90s, the people who were bashing this constructivist idea tended to be conservatives.
Yeah.
And now
it's been appropriated.
Yeah.
Quite effectively.
Alternative facts.
Yeah.
Teach people how to be comfortable with uncertainty.
That's interesting. That's a really interesting comment. How do you do that?
You teach them critical thinking as a suggestion. Through my undergrad and my postgrad, you know, historiography and scientific method, there is no such thing as a fact. There is a piece of evidence and how you interact with them. Critical to what we do is context. Give people the skills to critically look at something and understand the motivations.
But critical thinking doesn't, I'm thinking that when I try to do critical thinking, it may stop with my own bias. Right? I maybe, you know, read an article, think, okay, think critically about it, then until I get into my bias or my own personality, and just stop that. Right?
So Amelia mentioned the Donna Boyd TED talk, and there's a Medium article as well. There's a couple of articles she's written.
Yeah.
I really strongly recommend, if you're interested in this topic, you read those. She has a lot of interesting things to say about, like, the power and also the limits of critical thinking. Right. So I think to your point, yes, there is power in doing that. How do you do that with a 27-year-old tradie from Blacktown? Interesting challenge, right? But also her point is sometimes critical thinking, it gets politicized and it is used by people on the left to bash people on the right, right? It's, aha, you're not critical thinking, again, the quote you put up there, right? And again, the extent to which critical thinking is genuinely critical, or it just reinforces people's biases, and also the extent to which critical thinking is actually dependent on having deep subject knowledge in the first place. I'm talking too much. Okay, we had the lady there, we had the gentleman there. Any more? We've got Michael. Any more? Well, that's this lady here. Okay, so lady at the back.
I'm approaching this evening's lecture from a slightly different perspective than teacher librarian, and that is from the position of like educational policy and curriculum reform. So if you had the opportunity, there's obviously a place for digital literacy learning and development in education, and you had the opportunity to place digital literacies in the curriculum where you thought best and in the way you thought how, what would that look like?
It would start at about age 3, and it would be imbued into all aspects of the curriculum throughout the entire history, right up through undergraduate. Absolutely. I think it's got to be at the core of education, of an inquiry-based education, starting very, very early. Because it's way too late by the time somebody gets to uni.
Or they're that
Beg your pardon?
Or they're that trading.
Yeah.
I'm going to say I'm not sure at this point where that would best fit. I mean, I've got a project at the moment looking at digital citizenship education in the school context, and I'm interested in how it is very much not acknowledging the globalization of media and how we seek information and what have you, and I'm interested in, well, first of all, looking at how citizenship is about rights, about being able to become active in our communities, maybe have a role in decision making, etc. So at the moment, digital citizenship education is very much about how to have a good social media environment where people don't bully each other and stuff. So the politics is kind of taken out of it. So I'm sort of interested in that, and also how it might connect with global citizenship education. So some of those big themes that are brought up in relation to digital literacy, intercultural competencies, and encouraging that kind of communication practices where we do share our understandings of different worldviews and learn from one another. Surely that is also going to make us much more digitally literate citizens, in terms of understanding where people are coming from with their worldview, with their different belief systems, which may also influence how they act on social media, how they seek information, how they share information. So that's a project I'm working on that is more on digital citizenship, but obviously closely connected to digital literacy. So I think global citizenship education is kind of something I'm interested in maybe bringing it more in line with as well.
Any other suggestions for where it should sit in the curriculum?
Can I say one more thing in response to that?
Sure.
I think that the other really important aspect is that whatever digital literacy aspects of the curriculum exist, that has to be evaluated. It has to be assessed, because what is not assessed is not emphasized. It gets left behind in the day-to-day flurry of the classroom. So that's actually a really critical point.
Any other suggestions for where it should sit in the curriculum?
It actually sits, we were just discussing, in the Australian curriculum from a K to 10 perspective, it sits in the general capabilities. It's just a matter of which overarch is actually doing it and writing it into programs and making sure it's actually done. The curriculum is so crowded that you don't get much time to do it. It should be incorporated across the board, and it shouldn't just be left to the teacher librarian in their one period that they're graciously given every now and again to do it. It has to be done across the board, and it's not necessarily done, but it is there in the documentation.
Can I make one suggestion?
Please do.
Put it in physical education.
It's there.
It's already there. More
No,
than
but I mean specifically because it's about games, it's about relationships, it's about strength, weakness, and vulnerability.
It's major units already in there.
And I know, I'm just, or take it out of the curriculum completely. Just strip it out and do it some other way. Because what do kids learn in school anyway? Okay, right. Sir.
Okay, just to put a bit framework, I was rephrasing my statement question based on what I heard. Thank you much for the opportunity. Observing human bias, I've become a data philosopher, and pointing to the critical thinking that is essential. I call it system thinking, because I would now try to speculate, because stories.
You get one speculation.
Yeah. Okay. Not speculate, just to make an impact. We should be worried about industrial thought, because that's what makes people to narrow thinking, to specialize, and not enough, as Tesla said, not enough clear, wide thinking. So this is the problem. Nothing can change until we start thinking together. And as a specialized, we really don't understand each other. That's the biggest problem. What I'm worried about that thing is that actually we have a decision. we either start to cooperate, to start actually thinking about the system. Otherwise, the people that have money, power, they can start buying longer life, better life, and they can actually buy better organized and can get rid of the people that actually distract sort of from their goals. So I'm not pessimist, I'm just optimist that we should do much better than we do now. You are.
Comments, responses? Yes.
Agreed.
Yes.
But don't you think that's already the case?
No.
Don't you think that that's already the case? That the wealthy are buying all of this and excluding everybody else and disenfranchising everybody else?
It is going in that direction.
It is,
but we can
no,
do
it's,
something.
never mind direction, that's what we have now. That's,
Yeah,
that
yes,
what
we have.
exists right
Yes,
now,
that's
yes.
This is related to, if somebody just put 21 lessons for 21st century, and also Homo, how do you pronounce Jews?
Yeah, Homo
Okay,
Deus.
so it actually points to those things, even though I have much better ideas how to solve that thing that he has. But I think we should be careful about how we frame what we do, because he points that in history, people like more stories rather than facts, and we should be aware of that thing. We need to break that habit, because we are in a digital era, we can't continue with stories. And okay, that's it.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we've got Michael, we've got the lady over there, we've got the gentleman at the back, and we've got Boover. Okay, Michael.
Okay, now for something completely different. Because I am the postmodern social constructivist practices person.
Jordan Peterson's warned me about you, Michael. Carry on.
Only one, I'm disappointed. So I'm going to say something that I said at a panel on fact-checking and trolling at ACES 2 years ago, and which also talked about digital literacy. And I'm going to be the pessimist, because I'm going to say that I think the whole notion of fact-checking, the whole notion of digital literacy, all the language that's being used here is grounded in a very particular worldview. And it's an 18th century Enlightenment worldview that there is good information, there is bad information, that people seek information, that we're going to have a rational debate and we will present arguments and then people's minds will be changed. And the evidence of the 21st century, the very nature of social media, since that's been talked about a lot, is not a Habermasian world. So Habermas is the great 20th century philosopher of these ideas. That what we are seeing, so I'm going to say it, people don't go to Twitter for information seeking, to seek information. I'll go further, since I've said it many times in my articles. People don't seek information. That's an idea that we have imposed on their behavior. And we need to recognize that social media in particular, but in the 21st century in general, is not, so I was very taken by your talking about speed and the need to slow down. Social media are not going to slow down. Their whole business model is based on speed. It is, so if we look at the rise of Trump, of populists, they deliberately do not stop to engage in rational debate. They make one statement and then move to the next one, 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 and by the time someone has facts checked, it's old news. It's not just fake news, it's old news.
So what do we do, Michael?
We need to stop assuming that we can impose this 18th century notion, which comes out of a very particular, and I'll be honest, very privileged position, and seek to come up with new ways of looking at the world that fit the world we live in, rather than trying to turn it back into what we want it to be.
So I'm going to push you a little bit further, Michael, before we
Yes.
move on.
Good.
So how do we do that? What does that look like?
That looks like social constructivist research, asking people, listening to people about what they do and why they believe what they do and why they act the way they do, and understanding that they will always do so for reasons that make sense to them, rather than standing in front of them and saying, this is good information, this is bad information, and what you're doing is
So
bad.
can you tweak that so it applies to people that aren't researchers? Bearing in mind that most of the people in this room aren't researchers.
That's your language and not mine. I would say that every information professional needs to be a researcher, and if they're not a researcher, they shouldn't be an information professional.
That's fine. But okay, so
But actually, on that point though, I mean, maybe one way forward is not just imposing a one-size-fits-all, this is digital literacy education, this is
Yes.
how you fact-check, this is how you
Yes.
find if the source is credible or not, but maybe teaching research skills, which is, what researchers do is they problematize information perhaps that they see, they're critical in their thinking, but they seek to get to the bottom of things. They don't stop until they work out who is the source behind that particular kind of information. Maybe it is some of the slow approaches that you
But
mentioned.
as Heidi said before, if all information practice is contextual, ergo all digital literacy is highly contextual.
Yeah.
So there is no such universal thing as
No.
digital literacy. There are digital literacies depending on the information practice you engage in.
And there are research practices that come out of particular,
So I'm just going to get an input
cultural
from this gentleman over
situatedness as
here.
well.
I give you a simple example that I think digital literacy can help with. A few years ago, my brother passed me an image saying Vladimir Putin has cancelled the 2018 World Cup, and a photo with a logo of CNN on it,
Right.
and with Putin in the photo. And so I said, well, that's not possible. I went to CNN website and it wasn't there. So and this was passed to me through WhatsApp. So I think in that sense that technical skills, not so technical really, but some basic technical skills can help on at least going to the original source. That's something.
Can I make an even simpler suggestion? So I'm going to take what Michael said and make it even simpler. And what I mean is to make it even simpler. Given my research methods, find somebody who you vehemently disagree with and listen to them tell you why they believe what they believe. Right? Now, if you have an elderly relative, right, this is actually something you can do quite easily, I would suggest. Right? Certainly the discussions that I have with my 99-year-old, my 99-year-old wife's great aunt are quite eye-opening. So yes, we can do this quite simply.
There's
Yes.
some incredible dangers in that though, and there's some excellent podcast coverage, and I'm sorry I can't give you a specific one now, but if you look for coverage on how people who do internet moderation are affected by far-leaning viewpoints
Yep.
and get radicalised, that is a very dangerous thing when done without.
I agree. I'm not suggesting you phone up Blair Cotterill and ask to join his gang. That would be immensely foolish, right? But if we're talking about opening ourselves up to other points of view, then we kind of have to do that genuinely, I
But
think.
I can tell you what might happen. What might happen is they block you on Facebook and they call you a snowflake.
Yeah.
So that might happen when you're trying to open your, because my personal example is someone was sending me many years ago Breitbart links. It's this site that I'd never heard of. It was all interesting, interesting content, unusual. I was challenging some of the sources that they bring to me, and eventually they said, well, you're a snowflake, you're a, whatever, and blocked me. But the issue that we have with all the platforms is the algorithms are designed to polarize. So the algorithms are designed to emphasize whatever point of view, and I think this is what you were saying before Heidi, if you're saying that people aren't going to change their opinions, what do we also do about confirmation bias? So people will often stop their research behaviour, I think you mentioned this, when they confirm their own biases. So that seems to be almost like a challenge, and I'd hate to think it's an insurmountable one, but it seems to be the big challenge that we have. And even in our discourse now, one of the things that I find very unusual about discourse now is that we have accepted these dichotomies. So everything, algorithms are pushing everything to the side. We've accepted it. We've accepted this left and right. And when I was at uni in the early 1990s, we challenged that left and right. It was all very grey.
So that's specifically true in the US. There's a book coming out next week called Why We're Polarised by Ezra Klein, which I think touches on a lot of the things you brought up there, Angie. So lady there in the blue.
Oh, hello. I was probably going to talk a bit about what I was talking about earlier, just at a grassroots level, and what Heidi said, maybe not 3 years old, but there definitely needs to be investigation in how it's brought in at a younger age, because a lot of the issues that are arising are that kids are not educated, and there wasn't the scope for our education when we were at that sort of growing age, because this has become, with social media proliferation and things like that, it's becoming more and more of an issue. So I think that they need to be great consideration as to how that's implemented at younger ages, not just trying to deal with the problem when people start getting onto social media and spreading misinformation. So I think that was a question, but maybe it was just a statement.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Get them young.
Yes, that's the
Okay. Now I think there was that gentleman there, and then Booba, and then we had a whole bunch of arms going up. So that's fantastic.
I just really wanted to kind of continue on your point of that kind of bias to algorithms. I don't think we really realise how much of a bias there actually is. I mean, I think people don't really realise that, like, when you use services like Google, YouTube, Twitter, all of them, they basically have aggregators and algorithms that basically skew your whole perspective in a certain direction.
Yes.
So you really have to kind of work against that kind of current in order to be able to have critical thinking. So I think that's also something that's really overlooked, and also the fact that we actually just accepted that algorithm-based kind of like method of information several years ago, and just announced it, we accepted it, we didn't really challenge it, and it's just become the norm. So I think there's also a really big issue there that needs to be discussed.
I think I just want to sort of challenge just one thing that's been said about algorithms, right? So the algorithms are not designed to polarise. The algorithms are designed to continue engagement, right? They want you to click on the thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
From what you click on and that creates
Correct.
bias. So the problem is you have to try and break that, otherwise you get stuck in your own bubble.
But the
So
paradox is they are. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on, please finish.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So the paradox is they are giving you what you want, what you have told.
think you want.
Yeah.
Well, what other
Exactly.
people like you have told the algorithm that they want, right?
It's a combination.
What is the most likely thing to have you not click stop on the video?
Correct.
Yes.
Exactly. And the next video.
So what that argues for is algorithm literacy.
Yeah.
I'm quite serious. That's a term. That's
Or
a term.
changing how the platform's designed.
Yeah.
Platforms.
Autoplay and press stop.
Yeah. Well, and to understand that that's exactly what's
But
going
isn't
on.
it also telling that Google won't even let us know what their algorithm is?
Mm.
It's a combination of things, like when you click stop in a particular video, they'll look at that particular point, they'll look at the audio of the video as well, like particular keywords, because they have like machine learning,
Correct.
AI learning, etc. So it's much more complex, and it's getting even more complex.
But
So-
also to
Intricacies
break
of
that is to
Yeah.
break some of what we want socially. Because, I mean, there have been alternative social network sites that have been built, and it's like, Facebook does this to you, come to us, and how many people go there because the user experience isn't the same. In some cases, you know, some of the platforms, the way they're designed is to make you feel like you are in the place you want to stay in. Like,
So does
So-
it sort of say that, you know, like, sorry, I forgot this gentleman's name, but you said people don't go to social media or Twitter for information, is it that
No.
we go there for comfort?
We go there to be diverted, we go there to be connected, we go there to
Be
kill
social.
time.
Mm.
But no, we don't go there for information. But people don't do anything for
Sometimes we
information.
go there for information.
People have
Yes.
things they want to do. People have things they're interested in that only information researchers and information professionals say they go to seek information. I will tell you, having studied information researchers, when you study information researchers, they don't seek information either.
Well, I find information about this talk through social media. and in fact, that, just a comment on the Habermasian model. In this, well, I think intrinsically our human nature is truth seeking. We want to know the truth. We want to know what's true. And at one point,
That's
whether
a
we
very
believe it or
Habermasian
not,
worldview.
we try to assent to certain things. We collect certain available information, and we try to say whether that's beyond reasonable doubt. And then we assent or we disagree. My question for the presenter would be, at what point would you consider as it comes to that point of judgment? I think it's very, very hard to, I think our problem also is that meaning-making process that, I don't have my lifetime here because I don't have the lifetime to collect all the data. I cannot survey all the views around the whole world. But at some point my heart is saying, hey, probably I've got something there and I think I can assent to. And therefore I assent to that moment of, I think it's a eureka moment. And I'm curious whether in your view, meaning making, I don't know, I just thought you could expand on that.
Well, I would just say that it's very contextual. I mean, it's also iterative and ongoing. So that meaning making is something that occurs constantly. It's not really a matter of rationally collecting a bunch of data, assessing it, and then making some sort of assessment. It's just an ongoing process of meaning making in the world with all that you're surrounded by. And that feeds your decision making, your perspective building.
Yeah, I would say something different, and I think what you're getting at is, for example, we don't have all the time in the world. If you listen to the climate scientists, we have 6 years or something before we have to actually do something. Meanwhile, we're fighting about whether we actually believe it's true. So in that kind of an environment where our social media is weaponized and polarized, I mean, I don't know exactly what the intervention is or where, but there has to be a respect for science that's built in somewhere. In all of our deconstructive pursuits, and I've been involved in them too, the tearing down of science is something that has been I myself believe is something that's too harmful to allow to happen without building some respect for scientific expertise, for example.
But that's kind of a paradox in a way as
Yes,
well,
it is.
because it's what's built the society to respect for science in that sense is.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
if we don't, then I believe in climate
I'm
change. So
agreeing with-
therefore,
I'm agreeing with
So,
you.
so the clock is ticking both for climate change and for this event. So,
oh, nice. Super.
Hoover, did you have a question or a comment?
Both. I'll bring the elephant into the room. Nobody talked about religion here and the role of religion in all of this misinformation and in education. How do we teach children to hold two contradictory thoughts in their mind at the same time? And we all do that, and that's a skill. And nothing to do with digital literacy, but it will affect their digital literacy skills later. And how to deal with cognitive dissonance. How do we teach them that?
Much of that actually comes with cognitive maturity. It does. It comes with guidance, but it comes with cognitive maturity. And there's interesting work been done in understanding that evolution of understanding and thought, and finally coming to the point where one can, in fact, hold those contradictory notions.
Then the
at
role
one
of
time.
religion, which is increasingly divisive in every country in the world now. And that causes a flow-on effect into all of the misinformation and belief. And someone else mentioned faith at some point. So what role does that play in digital?
So funnily enough, the thing after PE where I was going to put digital literacy was actually in scripture classes, because of the faith issue. And so I'm just going to speak as somebody that was raised an evangelical Baptist, right? So that didn't necessarily give me a great skill at holding two contradictory ideas in my mind at the same time.
It gave you a prophetic motive to talk like you are doing now.
The Lord moves in mysterious ways. I think we're looking at Australia, so we have a post-faith, actually no, we have a post-religion society. There's a quote by G.K. Chesterton, which says that when people stop believing in God, it's not that they believe in nothing, it's that they believe in everything. Right? So I think one interesting thing is that we're moving from a world, somebody up there is going to start hammering me about that. What's interesting is we are moving, in Australia, we're moving from a world that was default Christian. Right? You could assume, like 40 years ago, you could assume that a Christian worldview was the default to Australian society. Right? You can't do that anymore. If you look at the stats...
Scotty from marketing.
Right. Well, Scotty from marketing is unusual, right? So there's two great books on this. There's Losing My Religion by Tom Frame and Beyond Belief by Hugh Mackay, right? And basically what you're seeing is a post-religion world that's suffused with faith, spirituality, and it actually, in some respects, it makes it both harder to have these conversations because we don't have a shared conceptual framework of the world that's like Christianity, either Christian or opposed to it, but it also opens up this opportunity for divergent viewpoints as well. That's my perspective.
And also, I mean, I would say, at least in some of my research, I've worked with young people in Muslim communities, and the capacity to look for the best in your faith, to look for some of the critical thinking practices, some of the practices of respect for difference, and some of the practices of learning, of seeking information, of learning about the world that you live in, of respecting the environment. I mean, some of those kind of things aren't necessarily, aren't weaponized against science, for example. So finding common ground would I would suggest would be the most important way to get at holding that, the cognitive dissonance, we often, the problem is this polarization and this sense in which looking for the worst of, religious communities do this, why don't they also do critical thinking? I mean, yeah, they do. I mean, and young people who are religious and have faith do.
But religion is often weaponized, and then
yes,
has everything else is weaponized because of that.
Science can be lots of things can be weaponized, and it's about seeing the other as the enemy, and it is about not respecting difference.
So we have time for one last question. That lady in the corner.
I was just going to make a couple of comments. You said about holding two thoughts of your, that are opposite of the spectrum in your brain or whatever, and being able to understand it. But to do that, people have got to be exposed to those two different thoughts anyway, and that sometimes doesn't happen.
But in school it does, so that is
education, etc. And it was just one other little comment. We teach at TAFE in the library studies just down there, and one of the questions I ask in the diploma unit, one of the final stage units, which is extended information literacy skills. The first lesson is, where do you get your news? And we write it on the board, and we, just put our little numbers next to it, and guess what? Facebook is the number of students who say we get our news from Facebook. So then that opens up a whole new conversation of, so what news sources have you liked on Facebook? Which sometimes they're not actual news sources. So when we're actually saying about people seeking or finding news or information, they, Facebook.
Because that content can be
Yeah.
created from pages.
Yeah,
then
and they don't read newspapers, they don't put the news on TV, they don't have any other, that is their news, so.
And then it can be formatted in a way that it's believable because you know you have a certain format where you go read a news article and they can like emulate that. So it's almost like it's tricking you into thinking, oh my god, this content is actually real, but it's not. And it really comes down to having like guidance and having teachers that can disseminate between the differences between the two, like what's actually.
Although to be
real and what's
fair, right, how accurate is the content of most newspapers, given the pressure of journalists to create content on a 24-hour news
That's why
cycle?
that's a really good conversation.
And the editorial.
And then that comes back and there's a lot of, you know, obviously a lot of it is fitting from other sources, it's going back to the source thing. It's not actually them being on the ground observing and then writing it up. It's, yeah, so we actually have this whole conversation which does start looking at sources and where they come from. Looking at a range of sources to get your news.
So in short, trust no one. And on that note of extreme paranoia, actually I'd like to get maybe just a final comment or thought or suggestion from our fantastic speakers, Heidi and Amelia, just before we go.
Do you have one?
Well, I guess I just want to say it's tricky. Well, I mean that quite seriously. We've got some tricky, thorny social issues to sort. And I'd like to think that we can make headway with education, but I'm really pessimistic in the long term about our ability to get ourselves out of the rut that we're in.
So we're all stuffed. Okay.
Just a second. Which is good because nobody can solve the problem unless we work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Amelia.
Well, I'd probably just reiterate what you said. Yeah, it is about understanding what people's worldviews are, how they do build up knowledge, and maybe trying to find the corresponding ideas, the common ground as much as we possibly can. Not consensus necessarily. We can't really return to a Habermasian system, and we never will with the system we currently have. But so I don't know how we find that common ground necessarily. But as educators, I think it's something that we perhaps should be seeking as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, so will you join me in thanking our speakers?